$13,000 per employee per year to comply with federal regulations.
Stewardship of natural resources is predispositioned in my veins. I was inspected 297 times.
EPA's proposals are projected to greatly reduce sterilization capacity and patient access to critical medical devices.
Well, we need fossil fuels.
I haven't read the report. I question the data.
EPA isn't listening.
I think it's about time to go back to the Administrative Procedures Act and do away with the EPA.
The EPA was responsible for approximately $70.6 billion in regulatory costs.
I don't do tax law myself.
I pay a lot of taxes, don't you?
Yeah, a whole bunch of taxes. Yes, sir.
I was picking up parts for like a 90s Toyota.
And Mr. Green, I couldn't disagree with you more. I'm hard of hearing. I'm an 80s metalhead. Go ahead.
It's shocking.
Invisible hand of government comes and tries to push you down.
When I travel around and speak to small businesses, I hear all the time how the cost of everything is so high. From the price of utilities to their labor costs, businesses feel like they are struggling to get ahead. Unfortunately, there is another new aspect that has made their operations even more challenging over the last 3 years, and that is the increased cost of complying with regulations. Most small businesses do not have a team of lawyers or a compliance department to look through all the new mandates coming out of Washington, D.C. Figuring out what needs to be done in order to comply takes time away from the employees or owner that could be better spent looking for growth opportunities or doing other revenue generating activities. And now we'll introduce our witnesses. Our first witness here with us today is Mr. Brandon Farris. Mr. Farris is the Vice President of Domestic and Economic Policy for the National Association of Manufacturers, also known as NAM, located here in Washington, D.C. Our next witness here with us today is Ms. Cy Cooper Wagner. Ms. Wagner is the Vice President of Exploration, Cooper Oil and Gas, located in the great city of Fort Worth, Texas. Our next witness here with us today is Dr. Lishan Aklog. Dr. Aklog is the Chairman and CEO of PAVMed, Inc., located in New York City.
It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Michael Green, who leads American Sustainable Business Network Climate and Energy Working Group.
The NAM commissioned a study which found that the total cost of federal regulations is over $3 trillion, an amount equal to 12% of our GDP. The average U.S. company pays approximately $13,000 per employee per year to comply with federal regulations.
And while I'm pleased to be here today to share what's probably a unique perspective, because not only am I a second-generation E&P mom and pop oil and gas operator, I'm a fifth-generation farmer and rancher. So stewardship of natural resources is predispositioned in my veins. It runs through my blood. I am a staunch supporter of clean air, clean water, and caring for the lands on which we provide these natural resources to America. In 2003, in oil and gas-friendly Texas, and 365 days in a calendar year, I was inspected 297 times. I passed all of those inspections, some with re-inspections, and that's up on average from 215 inspections on average a year from August 1st of 2015.
Although there is broad industry support for updated regulations, EPA's proposals are projected to greatly reduce sterilization capacity and patient access to critical medical devices. I'm here to provide my perspective as a surgeon and small company chief executive. I'm not an expert on environmental science, toxicology, sterilization technology, or even the deeper policy dimensions. Today, however, we address a proposed government action with a large potential negative impact, exposing millions of patients to the risk of delayed care and even death. And I assure you that's not hyperbole. Sterilization lies at the heart of medical device manufacturing. One of the most time-consuming and costly steps of the FDA clearance process is sterilization validation.
In Woodstock, this storm not only flooded our businesses, but it also wiped out our town's public water and drinking supply in what should have been our busiest summer peak season. This experience is not unique to Vermont. This is the same story of small businesses across the country as we learn to adapt to climate change. We know that small businesses are disproportionately impacted by the threats of climate change due to their limited resources to absorb financial shocks from such catastrophic events. A study by FEMA highlighted that 40% of the small businesses never reopen following such a disaster. This is caused by a lack of ability to relocate our brick-and-mortar businesses, being locked into less diversified supply chains, and an inability to compete with large corporations in the global marketplace.
Can you elaborate on the way the EPA treats the oil and gas industry compared to renewable energy companies? And what do you think the long-term impacts of this forced transition will be?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The difference between a lot of what you see in the green industry and the renewable industry, to which I'm very familiar with, on one of our farms and ranches, we have wind turbines on a ranch of ours that's in my family land. So I have seen what happens when the big renewables come to the small towns and what they do. And a big push from the EPA and a lot of people that support more regulation is that the jobs that will go away in my industry because this duplicitous regulation that's coming. Like I mentioned in my testimony, I'm highly regulated already. I'm a marginal well producer. I know what resources are coming out at the wellhead and what I'm selling. And if there's a loss anywhere between those 2 points, I'm looking at it before any regulator because I cannot afford to have a leak, a spill, or anything else. So those regulations are onerous and would cost the jobs in the community and the lifeblood in those small towns. And when the big green companies come in, it's a temporary job. A lot of people, you hear the rhetoric that there are green jobs out there for everyone that leaves the oil and gas industry because fossil fuels are bad and they're all going away. Well, we need fossil fuels. We need them for the medical products that the good doctor has talked about here. And those jobs did not come to our small town and stay.
Can you please speak to the cumulative impact of EPA's regulations targeting the energy sector on the electric bills of small businesses?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and absolutely. With the EPA's new power plants proposal, they're targeting 60+% of our power generation, and that's natural gas and that's coal. And they have to, within 10 years, have widespread deployment of carbon capture and hydrogen. Both of those are wonderful technologies, but they're not available at the scale needed for this. And what will happen in those 10 years is that 60% of our power generation will shut down. And so bills will go up trying to meet these, but also we'll have widespread power outages in the U.S. because of that power generation shutting down. So it can have a catastrophic effect on small businesses, Mr. Chairman.
Explain to the committee what banning the use of ethylene oxide would mean for human health.
Well, it starts from the fact that there are 20 billion medical devices sterilized with ethylene oxide in this country a year, and that represents about 1 in 2 medical devices. Ethylene oxide sterilized devices are everywhere in healthcare. You step into a hospital, every corner has IV, syringes, very simple technologies, as well as the most complex technologies, such as the heart valve that I described. So a meaningful decline in capacity for sterilization with ethylene oxide will lead to supply chain issues and patient access to life-saving medical technologies. And in some cases where they're urgent, where these procedures are urgent, it could lead to severe patient suffering and death.
Mr. Green, the regulations written by the EPA clean our nation's air, land, and waters. In your testimony, you mentioned that they can also level the playing field for small businesses. Can you please expound on this aspect of your testimony?
The small businesses and Main Street businesses that we work with don't have the opportunity to use our air and water as a dumping ground. And they often are feeling the impacts of such decisions that are made by large corporations. So when leveling the playing ground, all it's doing is it's holding the corporations to the same thing that a small business would probably decide in the first place of supporting public health in their local environment.
You cite a 2023 Crane report, and I haven't read the report, but I do know that in 2010, a study that was produced by Crane was criticized by CRS and the Government Accountability Office, 2 independent offices that work with Congress, right? Part of the U.S. Congress, as well as the Economic Policy Institute for using unreliable methodology and flood data. Were you aware of that?
We are aware that anytime there's an academic study, there will be questions about the validity of the data. We stand behind the Crane study and believe that is a valid snapshot of the cost of regulations.
You believe that the Congressional Research Office and the Government Accountability Office were wrong in their assessment of
Yes,
the
ma'am.
Crane
We stand behind the Crane data.
Okay. Well, I question the data based on the study and the opinion issued by our government agencies.
You have how many manufacturers that you represent?
Nearly 14,000,
14,000. And how many of them are small business?
vast majority.
Okay, the vast majority. Number one, do you think they would agree with that comment? And number two, has the EPA come and spoken to you and asked how would this rule affect those vast majority of 14,000 small businesses that create the jobs, that pay for the little leagues, that take care of, truly are the ones invested in taking care of their community's environment?
Thank you, Congressman. And what I can say is there doesn't have to be a trade-off. Industry has worked, and we have some of the cleanest air in the world. We have innovated, and those technologies have led to having some of the cleanest air in the world. One of the great problems that we're seeing right now with these regulations is that they are so close to zero that they are unachievable. So yes, there does not have to be a trade-off. We can have clean air and we can have a wonderful economy, but we cannot have it with these regulations that we're seeing right now. And then to your point about is EPA hearing, is EPA listening? I differentiate hearing and listening. Yes, there are hearing sessions where they hear concerns, but are they listening? What we've seen on PFAS, what we've seen on ethylene oxide is that other agencies are weighing in with EPA and saying, if you create a de facto ban on PFAS, we can't make semiconductors in the U.S., and the EPA isn't listening. We've heard the same thing on ethylene oxide. If you create a de facto ban on ethylene oxide, we will no longer be able to sterilize most medical equipment, and EPA isn't listening, sir.
Thank you.
In your testimony, you highlight ways environmental regulations help to level the playing field for small businesses. Can you also speak to their impact on markets and any new and innovative strategies that they may produce?
Yeah, no, they absolutely create the opportunity to move markets and create new products for consumers that I think there is a strong demand. As an electric vehicle driver in a rural community, my family has taken advantage of such amazing programs.
They're making it difficult to live in the United States. And I think it's about time to go back to the Administrative Procedures Act and do away with the EPA, because we already have a redundancy in every state. Every state has their own EPA. In Texas, it's the TCEQ. And those TCEQ members do a very good job of making sure that the air and the water in the state of Texas is clean. We don't need the EPA's help. I'm about out of time. Sorry I didn't get to ask any questions, but it needs to be clear on what the agenda is of some folks in this country when they claim it's about supporting American businesses. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Our friend Mr. Green on the end just said that he sees a 30-to-1 return on regulation. For every dollar they spend, they get a $30 bump. And I want to go down the line with the other three of you and ask you individually. Mr. Farris, you represent a lot of small businesses. Do you find that to be accurate?
I would say that I would love to see those studies. All of our studies do not show that.
So your members don't feel like regulation from the EPA helps their bottom line?
Not from what we're seeing right now. We can work together on regulations. Regulations can be helpful, but what we're seeing right now is they are not helpful, and they're all set at zero to where, to your point, it is shutting down businesses.
Thank you. Ms. Wagner?
I would say the inverse of the other witnesses. Duplicitous regulations cost money. They will never produce more oil and gas or any cost savings for my business, which will hurt my employees and the communities that we support.
Thank you. That also has the ring of truth to me. And do you think that further regulations give you a 30-to-1 increase in your profit margin?
I'm not focused on a profit margin. I'm focused on patients and patient outcomes, and that to me is the overriding question here: is that we have to have regulations that protect patients, but don't do the opposite, which is what we're facing here.
We are concentrated on making America great again through making Main Street great again. And I thank the chairman and the ranking member for holding this. The EPA, of course, you know, was created by President Nixon to monitor and enforce our national guidelines on the environment. However, under President Biden, the EPA has completely abandoned this mandate. Instead, taking their cues from radical environmentalists, they are attempting to regulate entire industries out of existence. In 2023 alone, the EPA was responsible for approximately $70.6 billion in regulatory cost and an additional 5.5 million paperwork hours for companies. Why do you think the Biden administration is proposing rules and regulations that would crush small energy producers like yours if you're part of the solution?
That's a fabulous question, and I appreciate your comments. And we'll even say something that I don't get to most people. You're welcome. Our industry is fiercely private. We're a small mom and pop. Again, I work with my dad and mom, with my husband and my brother. We never knew that we needed to be so public and educate regulators, legislators, and the general public about what we do and the quality and quantity of life that we provide. I don't know if it's just a lack of education and how things work, why the lights are on, why your cars are safe, why when there is a disaster, you are safe from it. And the majority of those reasons are because of fossil fuels. You know, I'm not sure why there's a target on my back. And as a mother of 2 young kids, I never try to be a doomsday sayer and everything's bad and, you know, the big guys are after us. I don't like to live in that world. I believe there's good in all people and good in this world, but it's a difficult line to walk as an E&P producer and someone in the oil and gas industry.
Can you talk a little bit about those investments, and can you talk about the over-regulations, the regulatory burdens that your small business, that Cooper Energy, is having to face, and possible solutions, or what specifically you think could help get rid of some of those regulations? If you've got any ideas, I'd love to be able to hear them.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the questions and for the time. It's an honor to be here today. The regulations that we have in place in our small company, we employ a full-time person to just manage the regulations that we have now. So just in our little company, it's a full-time job. In the office for staff, just on the paperwork side of things. For my guys in the field, it's part of their job every day to make sure that these regulations are followed. More regulations for me are going to mean I'm going to have to hire more people with, again, no benefit from those regulations to be able to pay those people, to be able to give them those good paying jobs in a rural area that are so hard to come by.
What type of alternatives exist if the rule is finalized, and how realistic are they for small businesses?
There are a couple of other traditional alternatives, such as steam heating and radiation, that have been used to sterilize medical devices, but they are just not appropriate, or they don't work in the vast majority. So about 50% of medical devices, the only currently available technology is ethylene oxide.
What is your estimated compliance cost over the next 5 years for the methane rule and with other EPA regulations? And how does it impact your bottom line?
Thank you. I appreciate your comments very much.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. The cost estimate currently, this is also very ambiguous, and I hate to sit here and say I don't know, but it's not clear. So many things are not finalized. So many things are being restructured. There's a tax that we're subject to that goes into effect before the formulaic work and the empirical evidence has been shown to know if I'm subject to that tax. Yeah. I pay taxes. I don't do tax law myself. I
pay a lot of taxes, don't you?
Yeah, a whole bunch of taxes. Yes, sir. I know that there are companies that have already been so concerned and so, quite honestly, scared. So many small businesses that are living in fear that they've hired some environmental companies to do this just to find out if they might qualify, because the environmental companies can't tell you for sure, yes or no, has cost small operators like myself approximately $10,000. And the answer is, thank you for the $10,000. Here's all the work we've done based on what EPA's put out. I don't know if you qualify or not. And if so, if you do, it will be up to a range like the Congresswoman pointed out earlier. It could be hundreds of dollars if you don't qualify. It could be millions of dollars if you do.
Did you find it easier or more difficult to produce energy for the American people today when Donald Trump was president or when the current administration is now in office?
Our business practices basically sustain over 40 years, regardless of who is in office.
Understood.
But I did not feel the target on my back that I do since President Biden has taken office.
Understood.
Before coming to Congress, I ran an auto repair and a machine shop with my husband. We're an independent, not especially lucrative, right? And I will never forget going into wrecking yards. I remember I was picking up parts for like a 90s Toyota, and the guy was like, the owner, a buddy, was like crying. He had an inspector there. So, right, wrecking yards, cheap land. it's not a high margin business. You're operating often in wetlands. So the environmental impact, and businesses like mine, I mean, we didn't cause the oil leak. We're fixing the oil leak. We're stopping the oil from going into the river, and we're the ones who are under scrutiny because we're the one fixing the problem. Mr. Green, in your opinion, how do you balance the needs of the economy with that lens of equity for the smaller companies that don't have the infrastructure to navigate?
I think the lens of equity should really be focused on the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the negative health impacts and the environmental impacts, because their communities have often been overlooked, overshadowed, and underrepresented when they're making decisions about where to put things that are going to create a lot of pollution in their
When you
backyard.
say they are making decisions, who are you referring to about making the decision to put their wrecking yard in the only place they can afford to put it? Who is making that decision?
The business
small business.
The business is making a decision.
So then you want to hold the small business accountable for not having the resources to go to a wealthier neighborhood.
I would want the small business to be accountable for the footprint and their business decision and the impacts that their business is having on their local community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that my experience is that the smaller guys are the ones who are accountable. We are the ones who are sponsoring the Little League team and donating to teachers and doing, we are part of the community. The small ones are the ones who are also the ones who can't navigate these rules.
To my colleague that was just spoke, I couldn't agree with you more. I appreciate your comments about the small operators, the small folks. And Mr. Green, I couldn't disagree with you more about the EPA. Let me tell you something. The EPA has shut down mining, manufacturing, logging, and timber producing in our great state. So I disagree with you fundamentally on the EPA trying to work with them, okay? I've seen the devastation. I've seen our farmers and ranchers. The WOTUS rule was devastating to small businesses. And so I think that I appreciate, I read your comments, I appreciate where you come from, but sir, I adamantly disagree with you. Dr. Aklog, each year millions of separate medical instruments are needed for nearly 1 million breast biopsies, 300,000 hysterectomies, 500,000 open heart surgeries, and then the 1.1 million C-sections that are performed each year. Are the instruments for all these procedures just mentioned sterilized by ETO, and what would be the impact if they were not available due to the lack of sterilization?
They are, so the answer is, the simple answer is yes, and as I said...
Microphone? Thank you.
I apologize.
I'm hard of hearing. I'm an 80s metalhead. Go ahead.
The answer is yes. So all of the examples that you gave, and I could list numerous more, those are kits, surgical kits that are packaged for use in surgery, and they require a gas to penetrate the packaging in order to be able to offer a sterile device. And so the answer is they are. That's the only option for those, and not having that would have, again, a devastating impact on delays for surgery and potentially death and harm.
You know, you added potentially death and harm. Here's the EPA making these decisions. Under EPA's proposal, millions of products would require revalidation. What would this mean for capacity and supplies of the critical medical technology needed for patient care?
In its current form, it would have a significant impact. So to revalidate, even if there was an alternative for those, to revalidate that technology, you have to go through a very rigorous FDA process, which we all understand. It's part of what we do every day. And that, to revalidate a complex technology can take many, many years. So the idea that you can channel into a new an alternative quickly without having an impact on patient care it's just not true.
It's just hard to run a business. It's just hard, let alone when the invisible hand of government comes and tries to push you down and stifle you. That invisible hand is not invisible anymore. We see it, we feel it, and hats off to you. Has it ever been this bad? Anybody want to jump in? Has it ever been this bad? Ms. Wagner, you want to jump in. What say you? Has it been this bad before?
I have the history. I'm not quite 40 years old, and I keep saying my company's 40 years old. Well, that's because it's the second generation, and my parents started it from nothing themselves. The same with farming and ranching. It's 5 generations. So while I don't have the experience of myself, I've learned from the experience of generations of my family. And in telling stories of this is what I'm facing, this is what it's like now, the generations past, my parents, my grandparents say to me, I can't believe that this is happening in our great country. I can't believe that they're making it so hard for us to feed the world and fuel the world and do it cleaner and better than anywhere else in the world.
Amen.
It's shocking.
You say we've gone too far. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I've only been around for a couple decades working on this. I haven't seen anything like this onslaught. Every regulation coming out near zero, every regulation targeting consumer choice, doing away with consumer choice, and doing away with entire industries. So, no, sir, I haven't seen it as bad as this.
What do you think, Ms. Wagner? Is it a brick wall, or do you feel like they are listening to you?
It's a brick wall. We've
a brick wall.
submitted through the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers, which represents 3,000 members in the state of Texas, of small to mid-size independent operators. We've submitted multiple comments with very specific, here are the problems, here are the issues, and nothing changes. It's falling on deaf ears.
Would you say they have a narrative going in, and that's what we're going to end, and it doesn't matter what you say? I don't even want to hear what you say. We already know what we're going to do.
Unfortunately, I
Do
think that's
they?
correct.
Do you think they know that? In fact, this is something I learned on the Steve Scalise Energy Tour last year, going to spend a couple of days in the Gulf on a platform to look at how we produce energy in America, learning that no one does it cleaner than America, no one does it safer than America. Do you think people that are making these rules understand that? Anybody want to jump in?
They don't.
They don't. So what happens when we, what I've learned, would you agree with this statement, that when we, in fact, we learn it's not a battle that the Biden administration has on oil and gas. It's just American oil and gas, because when we don't allow it to be made here or produced here, we're going to go somewhere else where they don't make it as clean or as safe as others. True statement?
Very true.
Very true. All right, let's talk about what happens if the unthinkable happens and Cooper Oil and Gas goes away or just succumbs to the pressure. What happens to your wells? What would happen?
Depending on how we go away, a lot of the issue that we have in this country is not with responsible operators, it's with things from the past or things that have been forced upon them. If regulations are forced upon small operators, there will be no resources for them. You will have more abandoned wells, more production. You will have less production in the United States. The fallacy in all of that issue, which is its own environmental hazard, is that the demand for our product goes nowhere. We must have fossil fuels to power our lives as they exist today and for the foreseeable future. And if you don't get it here, you're getting it from overseas. There is no Texas Railroad Commission, API, EPA.
Let me just say amen, thank you, and I yield back. Madam Chair.
If there's no further business, without objection, the committee is adjourned.